It took me a year after I realized I was the victim of municipal corruption in Chicago family courts to understand that there was actually a very active federal prosecution already being built on top of the people I had discovered. And this is one of the most confounding aspects. It's not super subtle. And the main person that I talked about is my ex-husband Peter Matt's attorney, one of two attorneys, the younger one, Christopher Werman, who at first I thought he was a cooperating witness, and then I realized, basically based on things he said, that he's an FBI agent. That's wacky, but so is the way that he behaved. And the part that sounds craziest is the Easter eggs that he and others left behind in the case weren't accidental. It wasn't like I discovered a prosecution they were trying to hide from me. They tipped their hand so that I could see what they were doing. And that gave me a false sense of security. I thought that my case would finally be prosecuted. So let me explain what I'm talking about. First of all, there's the fake address. This is the biggest one. After I was issued whistleblower numbers in January 2022, Christopher Werman and the senior partner, Stephen Klein, who I don't think is a member of law enforcement, I think he was a criminal target, they both just disappeared. They left Swanson Martin Bell and joined a new firm. But the weird thing is that on every order that Christopher Werman would have entered, he would have them usually written out and have Judge Johnson sign them. They were, he would always have a fraudulent address. What I mean by that is after I was issued my whistleblower numbers, Klein and Werman switched to a firm called KGW. This firm is located in the northern suburbs of Chicago, Bannockburn, I believe. But they created a fake firm called KGW Chicago, whose address is 400 North Michigan Avenue, Suite 400. And it wasn't just like there was an error one or two times. It was repeatedly this address, as opposed to KGW's actual address, was used on orders right next to where Judge Johnson signed the order and entered them. And when I tried to send correspondence to these lawyers as part of a lawsuit or as part of this family law case, first a letter was returned, addressee not found, and it said, this person doesn't work at Oil Dry. And then, I'll show you what happened. I went to the Wrigley building to try to deliver a motion for a preliminary injunction, which can be left in a business address. It doesn't have to be served. So I just needed to go to the office to leave it with a secretary or even leave it on a counter or, mailbox. So I went to the Wrigley building, which is 400 North Michigan Avenue, and I went up to Suite 400. KGW Law? Oh. No, I was looking for KGW Law. Maybe it's an old address. So I learned that there was never a KGW Chicago at this address. And over again, little fraudulent things like this were put into pleadings after I knew this case was going on. And another odd one on this same, it was a motion for child support. Christopher Werman typed out on a standardized form, he typed out the word net income and wrote the word gross income. So he modified the form. And obviously the forms are written to be in line with the law. And as I started to see these little clues that Christopher Werman was building this case, tipping the hand to me, I understood. And then in addition to these Easter eggs, Chris Werman would totally wink at me in court. He would basically hold up his cell phone and videotape me and talk into that cell phone and narrate what he would see. Or over Zoom court, he would say, and Ms. Mason is sitting in a room and nobody is in the room with you, Miss Mason? No, nobody is in here. And Ms. Mason is holding, oh, I had it actually. Okay, and then, so here's this brown book, and I just remember it because there was this day, I was in Iowa, I had to drive back to Chicago for court, and I was like, just so overwhelmed trying to like figure out what I was going to say because there's nothing I could say. Judge Johnson was going to screw me over or not. I couldn't control that. It wasn't based on reality. But so I was like, okay, well, then I'm just going to kind of hand it over. I handed it over to Mary. I was like, I'm going to let the Blessed Mother take it. And I brought a pen and I brought this notebook. And since I didn't have anything written, I never opened it. And Chris Werman, he had his cell phone and he's like, pointing down, and Miss Mason is just sitting here with just this brown notebook. And it was like, I knew that he needed to establish that I wasn't cooperating with anybody. But then he would also, in addition to filing motions that no divorce attorney would ever file, he would say things, in addition to saying FBI agent, when I'd never said that, he also said, with regards to his own client, the term child abuse. I never said child abuse in court. And the reason is because my ex-husband is abusive. To anybody who does not know domestic violence or family courts, this might sound surprising, but it's actually and I talked to a lawyer for Sanctuary for Families in New York, a domestic violence group, and they warn you, don't ever talk about child abuse in court because the judge will probably punish you and the kids. And it's also, you also have to, when the kids report it, the moms get punished too, even if we don't report it. They say that we coach the kids to say it. That's how bad it is. So the only people who are supposed to protect these kids and advocate for them, the courts tell us we have to hide it. It's just hell. Always been different, different from Steve Klein, who was like red-faced and belligerent and just disgusting. Werman was clean cut, athletic, very polite. And there was this one time when Peter got Judge Vega, the one who would like scream, got him to impose some sanctions on me. And at that time I didn't have a job and it was like a really bad situation. And Chris Werman was with me, and for some reason Peter wasn't in the room for a second, and it's like he looked guilty or sad. He felt bad about what he was doing to me, I could tell. And I just thought he had a conscience, but I think it's because he's a cop. I understood that I had made the mistake in how I approached Judge Johnson in my case and Michael Bender, the political patron who I believe is at the heart of the corruption racket. My mistake was that I was very confident in the justice system, even in Chicago. I just thought the grown-ups would come into the room and fix things. So once if I knew there was a federal law that somebody might violate, I always tried to get that raised. So whether it's the Americans with Disabilities Act in terms of mistreatment of my son with disabilities or securities laws, anything that I knew if you were a lawyer or HR, you would consider kind of like a live wire that you don't want to get near. I tried to stand on the other side of those federal laws saying, nah, boo boo, you're not going to cross over. But because they knew how corrupt the system is, they did cross over. But what that meant was that I was accidentally kind of helping them prosecute crimes because I was trying to bluff, like, don't commit a crime against me, but they were like, okay, I'll commit a crime against you. And it turns out they were right. The system is corrupt enough for it to work. Another way to think about it is, why would he do some of the things he did if he was just a divorce attorney? When Peter filed that motion for child support, he already knew that a bank executive had filed an IRS whistleblower complaint against him. Does it make sense to be filing any financial documents in court if you are a financial criminal? And Peter definitely knew he was a financial criminal. So a lawyer probably should have talked him out of filing those things. And just to drive the point home, Chris Werman, at the same time he was filing a motion for child support and saying that Peter's 2019 affidavit saying he had one company called Godecki and Associates earning $20,000 a year, he was swearing that was true at exactly the same time. He was filing a motion, and he got both of them, to have Judge Johnson, at the same time Judge Johnson signed an order saying Peter was broke and only had $20,000, he was giving Peter sanctions for me disparaging the companies Godecki India, Godecki Germany, and Godecki Poland, which Peter hides from the IRS. And all of this happened after I was issued federal whistleblower numbers while I was a vice president at a bank. Do you really think it makes sense for Chris Werman to think, hey, this stuff, these foreign businesses that Peter's hiding from the IRS, let's put those in a court filing with an affidavit? That makes sense. So a lawyer probably should have talked him out of filing those things, even if he knew that he would get a couple $1,000s because of the risk, right? It doesn't make sense. And in the same way, as a basis for asking for child support, Chris Werman doesn't use my financial affidavit. He uses my Chapter 13 bankruptcy. So to prove a change in financial circumstances where someone should pay, why wouldn't you go for the tax return instead of the bankruptcy form and draw attention to the fact that I'm in federal bankruptcy proceedings while you're ordering child support? Why would you do that in a family law case? I don't get that. So then again, in my attempt to kind of like dare Judge Johnson not to cross federal laws, when Chris Werman asked for child support, I was like, well, Peter has more money than you're saying because look, here's my IRS whistleblower complaint. Because, I mean, you can't punish somebody for truthfully filing a whistleblower complaint. But of course he did. So why does it make sense to ask a judge to punish someone, to retaliate for your client for her federal testimony? How does that make sense if it's not for building a federal prosecution? I really don't understand. Maybe a divorce attorney who's not a felon can explain it. I have been trying to talk to a federal prosecutor for 5 years. So I don't take saying that I think somebody is an FBI agent lightly, mostly because people already think I'm crazy. But that's also a matter of court record. So I want to explain why I did it in the first place. So I realize federal prosecutors are seemingly building a case with what I've testified about, but nobody's doing anything. So I realized I wasn't really waiting for somebody to prosecute people because I'm not a prosecutor. I was just waiting for the crimes to stop. And at this point, I still had my children. So I thought maybe I could avoid losing my kids. So when I wrote to my ex-husband in our messaging app that I thought his lawyer was a cooperating witness, I said Christopher Werman is cooperating with the feds. But at the time, I wrote it to him because I thought if Peter realized he was a criminal target, then he could stop committing more crimes against me, which would be in both of our interest. I thought maybe I could appeal to my ex-husband rationally and maybe not lose my kids. But instead, Peter showed it to Chris Werman, and that's what was used to take my kids away and say that I was crazy. So then, more weird Easter eggs showed up. He'd put things on orders like the status hearing is at 1 a.m. Or he'd put 3 different times and dates and then write on the order that I was at a hearing that I wasn't at. Just there were always like purposely like really bizarre changes and always this fake KGW Chicago that doesn't exist. So when my ex-husband wouldn't stop committing crimes, I thought, well, I knew at that point there were tons of marshals all the time. And I thought they were ordered under the Federal Witness Protection Act. And under that act, you're supposed to do a psychological analysis and get the permission of somebody in witness protection. So I thought, well, I don't consent, and nobody asked if it would make me crazy, and it's making me crazy. Not literally crazy, please. Oh my God. So I wrote to the chief judge of the Northern District. I think her name's Paul Meyer. And I just explained what was happening and how it was stressing me out, and I didn't want to be subjected to protective surveillance. And Chief Judge Paul Meyer wrote back that I wasn't in any case in her court, which, I mean, I think it might be true because as the case didn't proceed, I thought, well, they must be after people who are bigger than the people I testified about. Or trying to build a more important case. So, you know, I spent a lot of time thinking about who it could be. So, at the point that Chief Judge Paul Meyer was saying that I wasn't in a case in her court, I had begun to think, well, maybe the Northern District of Illinois wasn't a venue for a federal investigation, but maybe it was a target as well. And part of it was because I have some strange behavior. It's my Cuban sandwich theory. So I don't mean to like minimize this topic. It has been a fact throughout municipal corruption scandals over the years, whether it's New York 100 years ago, Chicago in the 70s, LA 5 years ago. Oftentimes corruption circuits kind of happen along old ethnic lines. And, you know, sometimes it's like old corruption patterns from other countries would be brought in, you know, into new towns when we were just forming our courts. People think it doesn't happen anymore because they don't have to go to court. So presiding Judge Grace Dickler, who headed the Domestic Relations Division until what happened in the Northern District. She's Cuban American. The first judge who was really shocking in the court, he's the guy who was just too vile to be around the public. So she promoted him to presiding judge of the Domestic Violence Division, which is bad. She made a bad man in charge of domestic violence cases. So that's a bad thing. So for some reason, that Cuban American woman helped that bad Cuban American man do more bad until he got pushed out for being bad. So then my case gets assigned to a judge named Jorge Alonso, who was put on the bench by Dick Durbin, had no federal experience, was not qualified to be in the federal judiciary. I think someone with federal judiciary experience or federal litigation should have maybe gotten that job, and maybe somebody not from the Circuit Court of Cook County because it's corrupt. So my case was assigned to Alonso, whose wife Diana worked for Judge Dickler, and Judge Alonso had worked for Judge Dickler, and he forgot to recuse himself. So I moved to have him substituted. It's the only motion I've ever won. And right after that happened, Judge Dickler resigned. I have always believed there was some sort of connection. And the other theory that I kind of believe in more and more is I believe the U.S. Senate is compromised. And I believe Dick Durbin is compromised. And I think that people might be looking at corruption as a way that some of these people have been compromised. So I hope that is being stopped. But I don't know who would be stopping it because I guess there has to be a deep state. Yeah. I mean, I know how unhinged I sound. I hear myself. It's, but it is what it is. Because then there were also these other weird things. Dr. John Palin also used a fake address. And Dr. John Palin just did things that just made no sense over and over again. First of all, so my ex-husband decided that he wanted to make our 13-year-old son CEO of his company in order to get contracts from IBM for disabled-owned companies. Dr. Palin told Peter to write it down in a business plan. Who writes that down? Who thinks you should write that down? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for a genuinely corrupt parenting coordinator to do it. It doesn't make sense for a genuine parenting coordinator to tell his client to make a business plan to commit fraud using a disabled 13-year-old. None of it makes sense in a divorce case unless people are trying to catch people committing obvious bonkers crimes. And then there was Dr. Bleckman. So this Bleckman letter, a month after I was issued my whistleblower numbers, shows up at the court without a signature. Dr. Bleckman's never heard from again, except on this day when I show up at his office and someone wanted me to see this card that said federal contractors were talking to Dr. Bleckman. Because people wanted me to have faith and hang in there. And then I'm also getting weird phone calls, meeting guys on dating apps. I suddenly in my Tinder, I get Michael Bender's Tinder profile, and it happens to have a picture of the Fontainebleau Hotel. And then a woman named Danielle Carrillo happens to call me and wants to talk about seeing Michael Bender at the Fontainebleau Hotel ogling a 13-year-old girl. I think it's weird that his Tinder profile showed up in my feed. And I think it's weird that somebody happened to call me to say that they saw him there acting like a pedophile. And now I think it's really weird that it's in Miami. But I don't know. I just know that my ex-husband's attorney is an FBI agent. I am a victim in residence. I don't want to be. And I wish somebody would fucking believe me.